This is Women in Linux. Welcome to the Women in Linux podcast, exposing women to information and careers in technology.
So thank you for everyone for listening and tuning in. This is Tamika Reed and Mike McGarr over at Netflix. He is an engineering manager of productivity. And we're going to open up with Mike telling us a little bit more about who he is and his role over at Netflix.
Hey, Tamika. How's it going? Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So, like you said, I'll start off with a little bit about myself. I am the engineering manager for the Netflix Developer Productivity and Insights team. And our team kind of focuses in two areas. The first area is really focused on, you could argue, build automation, infrastructure and build automation. So building tools to enable engineering teams at Netflix to produce their code as quickly and reliably as possible. And most of our code is in Java or Java-based languages like Kotlin or Groovy. And we build these tools for engineers at Netflix. And then we also have another team. I have another team called the Developer Insights team, which is responsible for gaining insight, making sense of, and refactoring code and infrastructure at Netflix. And that team's responsibility is really for building tools to understand the development ecosystem at Netflix, understanding where there are challenges, problems, opportunities for improvement, and then building tools to help us enact change or refactor the infrastructure to remove dead code or debt in the infrastructure. And that encompasses the two halves of my team and the role we play at Netflix.
Cool. This sounds interesting. And speaking of that, getting code and your ability to build your team, what kind of skill sets did you take into your position, and what kind of skill sets have you gained with being in that position, if any?
So I became an engineering manager. I joined Netflix 3 years ago, became an engineering manager shortly after joining. But I had been a manager and director at different companies at different times throughout my career. So in coming into Netflix, my skill set was largely, I had to have a fair amount of technical skill set. Netflix only hires senior software engineers. And so most people have a pretty extensive career and technology background. So I happen to have a background in Java, on the JVM, building solutions in the DC area, predominantly for the federal government. I did a lot of work in consulting for the federal government, as well as building solutions for around continuous delivery. So I built on a number of projects and a number of teams. I built solutions around how to get your code out the door as fast and reliably as possible, which got into version control, best practices, build automation best practices, deployment best practices, continuous integration, packaging, continuous testing, test automation. A lot of those practices were deeply ingrained in my belief system as how I believed software could be developed and should be developed. And you could draw the roots back to the Agile and XP movements. Mm-hmm. But and then on top of that, to being a manager, my skill sets, I really had to expand. I think people's personalities sometimes just lend themselves to being a people leader, and I happen to be just a people person. And so I felt natural in the position of leading a team or coordinating, and that's always been kind of the place I've been in. I tend to be a little outspoken, and so I am comfortable being an advocate for my team, being an evangelist for my team within Netflix and prior teams. And then I think having a diverse background, not just one that was well rooted in, I think, how Silicon Valley does software engineering, which is very important and very unique, but having a diverse skill set and background. My background wasn't originally in computer science, and so I have this history background, and I think that has also contributed to my skill sets I bring in as a manager. Mm-hmm. Communication skills, writing skills. Prior to joining Netflix, I ran a meetup in DC called the DC Continuous Delivery Meetup, which was helped me just, build my network, but also organizing and public speaking. I did a fair amount of public speaking leading to that. And then I also, wrote a blog and maintained a blog for a while, and I still do. And that helped with writing. So these are all kind of skill sets that led to me coming to Netflix and joining as an IC originally, but also as a manager. Skill sets that I've learned since joining. That's an interesting one. I think, for those who haven't read the Netflix culture deck, I think it's well worth a read.
Okay.
You can Google Netflix culture, and there's a slide deck on SlideShare that describes the Netflix culture. I think learning essentially how to be an embodiment of Netflix culture has been kind of one of the biggest things I've taken away in the past 3 years. So Netflix is big on freedom and responsibility, learning how to balance, not implementing solutions based on rules, but based on carrots. And, if you want the company to go to implement a certain, practice, you don't limit them. You actually enable them to do that practice and make that the best practice possible. I think that's an interesting approach and something I'll definitely carry with me. Culture that's strongly rooted in feedback and candor is definitely probably the number one thing, is learning not only the importance of feedback and being comfortable giving feedback, but also how to receive feedback. Not fighting when someone gives you feedback, not defending yourself, but thanking them, because feedback's a gift. I think that's one of the things I will carry with me to every job I have. Those are the big things for sure.
And you said a lot of interesting things. I didn't get a chance to write them all down.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go off of what I got written down. And
Sure.
one of the biggest things is transitioning from government to Netflix. So we all know, I don't like that sound. We all know that, the government, and depending on which branch you're in, can tend to be a little slower than what it is out, say, we'll consider public sector versus private sector. And changing your mindset and also the people that you work with. Because typically in government, the crowd is much older, or they've been around forever. So, we know we got this project coming up. It's going to take us 2 years to get this project totally, fully implemented, and we're just going to do this. Versus we're going to set up this project tomorrow. We hopefully have this done by next week, or whatever the turnaround time is. So making that transition from government to private sector, how was that transition for you, or were you already mentally prepared for that?
Well, we're not off to a good start because I've already lied to you. There was a transition period between government I had and Netflix. So I worked for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years as a director of DevOps at Blackboard. So I had some transition between government and commercial. But most of my career has been contracting the federal government. So I think the question still is valid. To the question, I think I never felt comfortable in it where, I had, 6 forms of approval and submit a request to the CCB that meets only once a month to make a change to a library that it lives in my project. I tended to be the instigator, the troublemaker. I kind of lived by a ask for forgiveness, not permission motto. One example of this, and so that in some ways I was frustrated by the speed at which government sometimes moved at. And right. To your point, this is not every agency. I worked at some agencies that were very progressive and moved very fast, and that was great. I love that. I took to that. But like one great example of a story, I joined a new organization, and they said we had to use a certain version control system. I think it was Serena Dimensions. And for anyone who's ever used Serena Dimensions, it is built for slow moving organizations. And so I asked, okay, so tell us the rules about what we have to use for Serena. Like we have to have all our code that we worked on checked in every single day to Serena, and it has to be associated with a change request. I said, okay, great. So what I asked for is an extra desktop, and on that desktop I put Jenkins and GitBlit, which is a Git server, and so the developers could work every single day in a continuous integration environment, which they didn't offer us at the agency. And we use Git, and then one of the jobs in the Git server, the Jenkins server, would just be to sync every day everything from Git into Serena. So we stayed compliant, but we still had the effective development environment that we needed.
Right.
So I think in some ways, if I were to look at somebody who is coming out of the federal government environment right now to say, would they be a good candidate for Netflix or I think I would not look for troublemakers like myself, but I would look for somebody who was frustrated but still kind of pushed through, didn't just throw their hands up and say, oh well, I can't move forward. I'm going to go, work 10 to 2, but really tried to fight and work in the system within the rules and really make a change and difference in the organizations.
Push the envelope.
For real. Yeah. I think that, I also tried to do that. I tried to convince people that the dangers of some of the practices and the gates they put into the process. And sometimes I was successful and sometimes I wasn't.
Right. And also coming out of that, the government to public sector was a change in culture, and not just culture and how you work, but culture of who you're around.
Yeah.
And people who are not necessarily, I don't want to say like-minded, because not everybody is like-minded when you go to other companies, but people are a little bit more eager, a little bit more happier. If that's the right way to say that, there
it is.
To be in coming from one place to another. I don't know if it was a weight lifted off your shoulder or it was more like a sigh of relief. You tell me how that culture changed, even at Blackboard to Netflix. There's a change in culture. Like how's that change? How have you embraced that change?
Yeah, I think I've gone through different stages of embracing that change. So, in the government and even at Blackboard, in both instances, whenever I'd go to a new agency, I'd always walk in with a little trepidation. I was nervous about, would I do well? Would I fit in? And then I would reflect back after I left and realize that in my position, I would shift to eventually to one where I was trying to make change across the company or try to make change across the organization. I was, and I know this sounds, I guess I'd be the one who is really teaching more than learning. And that was generally a sign that I was ready to move on. That hasn't happened at Netflix. And in fact, the biggest cultural change is the fact that everyone who is working here is extremely intelligent, extremely smart, extremely driven, and is good at what they do. And so the change was just being one of the many, if that makes any sense, which was liberating, right? You could have a team of 5 here that of very capable engineers that could produce more than a team of 25 or 30 in a whole organization, in government contracts, and they would do it, in short order. And I think what's unique about Netflix in general, and I don't know if you want this podcast to be a Mike promotes Netflix podcast, but it may turn out that way. The culture here not only hires smart people, but people who aren't brilliant jerks, right? So we really value someone who can collaborate well with others. We say we have the term stunning colleague. So somebody who's smart, who can you can learn from, but also you like working with. And so that was a big change as well. This idea that I'd never been in an organization that was willing to remove people that were jerks, were bullies, and would make you feel bad when you walk into meetings. So everyone here is just smart and awesome. That took a while to get used to, and it took a while to make you, to suppress your imposter syndrome, because that's, I don't know how many people are comfortable admitting it, but I definitely had imposter syndrome coming in. And it, it takes a while to get comfortable with that.
I'm glad you were able to admit that. That's a good thing. But the other good thing is you recognize it and you overcome that. So I applaud you for for one, recognizing, two, overcoming it, and three, continuing to move forward. That's very important, because what it sounds like is you have an encouraging, not just encouraging staff, or you have an encouraging cohort
Yep.
within your group. And so I'm making assumptions here, and I don't want to make this assumption here, but I'm going to assume that because one of the questions I have was, how do you keep acquiring your skills? And I'm going to assume that you keep acquiring your skills by the people that you're around.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So they push the envelope for themselves, which internally pushes you, or you're getting shown. So I'm going to say there's a two-way street there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I learn from people all around me. So if I think about the engineers that I hire on my team, I'm constantly learning from them. They're heads down, I'm not, and so there's obviously they're going to be. My goal is to hire engineers smarter than myself, and so I'm always learning from the engineers on my team. My peers, I'm other managers at Netflix, I'm always learning from. We have a one-on-one culture, and so I'm constantly having conversations, discussions about Netflix, or how things are going, or how our teams our solutions are being driven, and how they're working. And they're always giving feedback and adding perspectives. And so I'm constantly learning about, either something new, and then even my leadership as well. I'm also,
right.
So there's a lot of that learning at Netflix from my peers, but I do a lot of learning outside of Netflix as well. A lot of reading in the industry. I think conferences are also a great place to pick up skills. I think you and I, when we met, we chatted a lot about meetups. I'm pretty much addicted, I think, now to running meetups. So I started one in DC, and I had to move, so I had to pass it off. And I just recently started another one here in the Bay Area. So I believe in meetups so much that I will continually probably try to be a part of one in some way, shape, or form.
Right,
So.
and I just did a podcast with the CTO over at meetup.com, and we were just talking about that, like the culture of meetups, and we also talked about sometimes it's good to have them virtually as well too, to reach a broader audience that that can't get there, the people that can't make it because there's a fire in the hole and they can't leave work, but they still want to come and listen to the discussion, being able to have it recorded, or being able to have that, have a way to go over the meeting notes, or if you will, from what was discussed and so forth. So I'm a fan of meetups, and I also think meetups kind of drive innovation, and in terms of you get a chance to meet people and talk to them that are working in day-to-day jobs that may have, say, a problem, but you have an idea how to fix it. So you go home. If you're like me, you go home and you sit down in a lab and you're like, "Ooh, I can fix that problem." And you get back in touch with the person and you're like, "Hey, I think I fixed your problem."
Yeah.
That's just me. This is how I like to do things. I like to, I buy computers off of eBay all day, every day, storage and so forth and so on, and throw it in a rack. I need to do that. Like, why don't I just use AWS Cloud? Because it's just not the same for me. It's not the same as cabling it up and making sure it works and you're getting the right bandwidth or burst between the servers and so forth and so on. So that's just a nerdy thing for me, but that's fun for me. And showing someone else how to do that is fun as well too.
You're listening to Women in Linux.
What I also gather out of you making that transition is you're in a constant mentorship type of role. Like, you're constantly mentoring and receiving mentorship from others. Is that true? How's the mentor working for you? Like, you being mentored as well versus you going out and mentoring?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think prior to joining Netflix, I think I always had some informal mentorship arrangement, both as mentor and mentee. If I look back at my career, there's definitely, a couple of individuals who I can attribute to being, mentors, whether we call them that or not, that really pushed me outside of my comfort zone and helped me get to where I am now. Mentorship, formal, informal, I don't, it's an interesting question. I thought about like kind of who serves that role here. And there isn't, I don't think anyone I'm either being mentored by or mentoring, which is, it's neither good nor bad. I think it's a product of Netflix in that we hire only senior people. It doesn't mean that mentorship does not happen. It just tends to be not a core tenet of our culture, as it would be if you have a culture that's more diverse in the getting engineers, right out of school. Mentorship becomes a much more critical thing. Right. Especially when you start talking about pulling out of CS programs and getting, CS programs put an emphasis on the technical details of how to write, how to build systems, how software systems work. A lot of CS programs don't focus on how to be a good colleague, how to work on a team, how to collaborate well with others, right? I think those interesting soft skills, those are, oftentimes great opportunities for mentorship. And I've heard of, many people here in the Valley who do work at companies that tend to have a hiring, a college recruiting program. That is a big part of the company and culture. It's interesting as a manager at Netflix that most managers have some type of mentor role in other companies. That is something that's just not per se something I have to spend time on. But to your point, it does happen somewhat informally, I'm sure, from time to time, right. Just not as prominently as it has in the past.
Right. And with that being said, like when you're looking at your team and you're trying to, and I guess this is an overall question as an engineering manager, and you're trying to architect the future and kind of guide your team, like, push forward. How do you do that and make sure everyone comes along aboard with that idea or what future trends you're seeing and so forth and so on? Like, how do you get that information? How do you feed that, interpret that information and feed it to your team and then, build it out? How does that work for you?
So there's an interesting kind of feedback loop that happens between the engineers on my team and myself. And for me, my role, one of my roles as a manager is, besides building a team to solve a problem at Netflix, it's also to provide context to my team. And so context being, information that's relevant to their day-to-day job. And so what I do, I spend a lot of my time meeting with other people at Netflix, whether they're other engineering managers, other directors, other ICs in different places, whether customers, partners, whatever it may be. And we'll have conversations about what's going on, what their pain points are, what's new. And so I over the course of the week, I'll collect a whole bunch of context and information. And what I end up doing I end up writing what I call a week in review. A week in review, just a single document that has a distillation of all the relevant information, the context, back to my team. That provides them with kind of a weekly finger on the pulse of where Netflix is going as a company, where the trends are in the company. When you talk about industry trends, when you talk about technology trends, that's actually where they are feeding that information up to me, because they're on the front lines there. So a great example, we are a Java shop. In our org, we tended to be Java and with a bias towards Groovy, which is another programming language, dynamic programming language on top of Java, which adds a whole bunch of benefits and some challenges, right? In a dynamic programming language, you miss out on the extra feedback that the compiler gives you. And so my team, a member of my team, explored and started playing with a language called Kotlin. And it was pretty nascent. It was pretty new language, but he was a big believer that the added advantages that it provided above and beyond, Groovying Java were worth the investment. He has since convinced me and the rest of the team that this is the language we should be using for most of our systems. And we've converted a couple programming systems to Kotlin. What was notable about that is no one told him to do that. I didn't tell him to do that. That Kotlin wasn't even my radar. So it was very much a engineer identified this, executed this because he believed in it. And that ended up being the trend that was the technology trend. And he believed in that enough to convince everybody. As far as training goes, we don't do necessarily any training or anything like that. Here, we do spend a lot of time communicating with peers and other organizations, right? So if you look at our team is the developer productivity team, but we focus a lot on build automation and infrastructure around building software. We will meet with other companies, other industries, people in the Valley, people who produce products in the space, and get a sense for what challenges they're having, what challenges we're having, and maybe to your point about the meetups, like trying to figure out, are there opportunities for collaboration on open source products? Are they have lessons learned that we can benefit from? So we spend a lot of time in collaborating there with other companies and meeting with them very informally. And that's one thing that's, I think, great about where we're at right now, is just being able to find out who's having different, who's solving problems differently.
Right. And also gives you a different perspective on, how to approach a problem that you might not have looked at, just like you were talking just before with the engineer that just kind of set his own standard. Like, I'm going to beat down my own drum. Like, so I totally get that. And in terms of the open source projects that you're working on, or have worked on, which one are you most proud of, and what are you working on right now?
So my team has open sourced a whole bunch of plugins for Gradle, the Java build tool, called Nebula. And so Nebula is all open source on GitHub, and it represents our learnings in the Java ecosystem around how to build software at Netflix scale. And, there's plugins that we have for those who are your listeners who are using Java, and especially using Gradle. They should definitely take a look. Some examples of some plugins that we use are, we wrote a plugin called the Gradle OS package plugin, which can convert your Java application into a Debian or RPM package. I consider that your gateway drug to DevOps. If you haven't done DevOps, it's a way to get your sysadmin to love you, speak his or her language. Instead of saying, here's my war file to deploy, here's my deb, go ahead and install it. They'll love you for it. We have also the dependency lock plugin, which allows you to take your resolved dependency graph and save it into a file, so that you can save that file and then go back to previous builds of your previous commits of your application and rerun them. Have this idea of a resolved transitive dependency graph that's stored in code is a pattern that we've taken from languages like Ruby and via bundler and applied that to Java. And there's a whole bunch of other plugins predominantly in the space of dependency management at scale. So I think that's an area we tend to focus on a lot. What we're working on right now, I'll share with you a plugin a tool that one of my engineers is just open sourced into the Netflix OSS open source called Rewrite.
Rewrite?
The goal of Rewrite. The goal of Rewrite is to provide a Java source refactoring tool. The idea being that one of the challenges in a distributed architecture is that often, if you have a library that's shared code base across the organization, and you want to remove, say, an API, it becomes very hard. It becomes a social exercise. You have to communicate with all these different teams, make pull requests, which is tenable if you have 5 downstream consumers of your library that also need to make this change. It becomes untenable when you have much larger code base. The idea behind Rewrite is to allow library owners in particular, or centralized organizations like ourselves, to create these rules that live inside the ecosystem or the jar that can effectively convert your code, refactor your code programmatically. So you can imagine a world where I bundle up a 2.0 version of my library where I've changed all the APIs and interfaces. And then when you consume my new version of my library with these rewrite rules built in, say, coupled with a Gradle plugin that knows about rewrite, the build will fail, but it will say, hey, we have some refactoring rules that were bundled in this version. Run the refactor. It's going to update your code. Your APIs are done. And now you've converted to the new API of the plugin. This is going to allow us at Netflix to really start refactoring code in mass. This is a pattern that you're starting to see at tools at companies like Yelp and Google and Facebook. They all have variations of tools like this. So this is the first one in the Java space. So we're pretty excited about its potential. It's still fairly new.
And that's awesome. And that brings me to one of my other questions as well, too. So I'm give you this scenario. I'm a college student, and I'm majoring in CS, and I want to get out and I want to work for Netflix, and I'm not a senior programmer, right? So how can I ramp up to become that senior programmer where I can get hired or get the skill set where I can get hired at Netflix? What should my focus be? Should I be focusing in on GitHub and Nebula or rewrite when it gets released, or if it's already released? How should I be mentally preparing myself and my GitHub account and so forth? How should I prepare myself?
Yeah, I think the best way to prepare yourself as a young software engineer is to think about trying to make yourself T-shaped. I'm not sure if this is a term you're familiar with, but the idea when I look at candidates and look at to join my team, I'm looking for someone who we consider T-shaped, which means that they're broad in their skill sets, but deep in one or two areas, right? So, for instance, if I'm looking for somebody, say, to join my team to help support our Nebula Gradle infrastructure, a strong skill set I'm going to want to look for is someone who's passionate about builds, passionate about Gradle, passionate about the JVM. But as far as being T-shaped, I'm going to look for other things that are peripheral to that, right? I want to know that they're strong in Unix and understand Bash. They understand basic constructs like networking. They have some understanding of test automation, right? And what are their beliefs there? There's all these different peripheral skill sets that contribute to them being strong and deep in one area. So I think early in a candidate's career, they have to think about if I went back and talked to young Mike McGarr coming out of college, I would be learning, learn as much as you can about Linux, learn as much as you can about networking, learn as much as you can about cryptography and security, learn about how all these things work together, learn about how to build a balanced system, learn about software engineering practices and principles and design patterns, and then pull the rug out from under yourself every once in a while. And if you're a Python developer and you're deep on Python and you've only been out of school for 2 years, stop building Python, start building in something that's totally different, like Clojure or some other language. That diversity of understanding is going to be huge going down the road when you'll be able to speak to the advantage and disadvantage of certain platforms, stacks, languages, tooling, whatever. And I think this is especially true if you happen to be somebody who has learned to program on Windows in .NET. I'm specifically calling them out because the .NET platform just tends to be notorious at abstracting away a lot of the details, the underlying details, and it doesn't. I think it basically shields the engineer, which is seen as a good thing to a lot of organizations. They don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure for how your code is built, but it leaves you kind of crippled in your ability to navigate to, say, the JVM, to Ruby, to Python, any other language or platform. And .NET's kind of unique like that. So nothing wrong with .NET. You should definitely use it because it's a popular platform, but definitely make sure you understand how to operate in other languages and platforms that, say, require you to use something like the command line.
Right. And that's one of the things in our group. I try to emphasize, learning fundamentals. I just think for me, it's my own personal bias here. You rooted Netflix. I'm going to root Linux here. Learning Linux, like the basics, I just think I'm biased. people call me crazy. It's whatever. But I think anyone who is going into the field of DevOps or security or whatever needs to at least get a Linux certification. I don't care which one you get, but at least get that under your belt so you understand, firewalls and security and so forth and so on. So when you're and at the same time when you're learning coding, whatever language you choose, you understand when someone's like, well, we got to secure this app, or we're pushing SE Linux or whatever. You're not befuddled and looking like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. You just broke my code. It was working before you did whatever you did. That mindset. Don't think about security last. Think about it first. So that's just me and what I think. I just think it levels out the complexity as you get up the stack.
Right.
So by the time you get to do your external, internal audits, your burp sweeps and so forth and so on, it's not a far-fetched idea. It's not, it didn't come from another planet. Like, I don't know what that is. So when someone says whatever this is to you, you're like, well, that's the code I wrote. Yep, there's a memory leak in here, or there's this, or there's that. You're not thrown off. That's just my 2 cents there. So I agree. Yeah. We're pulling the rug out from under you on that one.
You're listening to Women in Linux.
And I think what I touched on was really about technical skill sets. I can't emphasize enough how far your ability to navigate as a team player will get you. So I think learning how to collaborate, challenging yourself to work well with others, understanding your limitations and your personality and your what biases you have, and understanding which ones you need to tackle to improve and which ones you can live with, right? For instance, I know how my brain works. I am a visual learner. So if someone's explaining something to me, and they want me to understand it, I have to stop them and say, you need to go to the whiteboard and draw a picture. It's something, it's just an efficiency I know. Like I learned something only by drawing pictures. And so knowing that, and it's not usually a big ask to somebody, especially when you have an environment where there's tons of whiteboards, someone just turns around and can start drawing. Understand who you are and how you operate in a team, I think will go well. And then kind of along the same lines of pulling the rug out from under yourself, challenge yourself, push yourself a little bit. If you're not capable of doing that, find someone who will. Because I think the only times that I ever made progress was when someone said, you need to do this. And I'm like, I'm not comfortable doing that. And like, well, you should give it a shot. And it turned out I was comfortable. I just hadn't done it before. So. Right.
And this is the final question, which is not a question. It's actually a closing remark. It is a chance for you, Mike, to close out with whatever you want. It could be another Netflix shout out. Go Netflix.
But I haven't given enough of those already.
or just a shameless plug on what do you see yourself in the future? What's your outside of Netflix? What would you like to share that you do your meetup or an upcoming meetup? This is your floor. I'm not asking questions anymore. I'm turning it over to you. I'm dropping the mic.
Yeah, I think for any listeners out there who are interested in things like, working at Netflix and developer productivity, I'm always interested in hearing about different people's challenges. One of the things I love is sharing and talking and hearing people's stories. DevOps, continuous delivery, test automation, build automation, dependency management. These are all things that I love and near and dear to my heart. These are things that we do and tackle at Netflix. And so I'm always looking for great talent. So I'd be remiss if I didn't put a plug in for coming to work at Netflix. But I think that the other thing I'll say is that you don't have to work at a place like Netflix to have a very successful, fulfilling career. I think pushing yourself, challenge yourself, breaking through any fears or barriers of getting into open source, whether contributing to other projects. I think that's an area you should definitely push yourself to. And then I would also recommend for people, to be masters of their own career. So if you're in an environment that doesn't enable you to, say, work in open source or do public speaking or, do the work that you find compelling, apply the law of 2 feet and find a job that will. I think software engineers are in demand. DevOps engineers are in demand. I think most people hold more chips in their hand than they think. And maybe it's about timing, but I hope that everyone feels empowered that they can have some mobility, career mobility. So
I agree with this speaking. I have to, co-sign that. I encourage people to speak. I did my Ignite talk at VelocityConf. I encourage people to get out and speak more. It forces you to look at the environment that you're in, and it also forces you to make sure you're conveying your message properly. So there's a lot of things that go within that research, formatting your thoughts, delivery, and on top of that, being able to answer the questions. So so it's a lot that goes in that, and you'll find you're pushing your limits. So speaking, I even encourage people to speak on not necessarily just podcasts, but maybe setting up a live stream and just open yourself up to a live stream on a coding exercise that you're doing, and do some live coding and let people critique you on that. Just throw it out there. You never know. You end up liking it. At least I did. It was kind of fun for me. I need to get back to it. But Mike, it has been fun. We appreciate you over at Women in Linux. We got a lot of good information, a lot of wisdom, a lot of words of encouragement, and especially about the culture. And it's not just about the culture of Netflix. It's about the culture and the mentality that one should at least try to have. If you never ever had it before, at least try to look at it from a different perspective and embrace it and move forward. So we thank you over here, and we'll make sure that this podcast goes out without a doubt as one of the top ones of how to think outside of the box. Because I'm always thinking outside of the box, so I'm always trying to encourage people to think outside the box. So I know sometimes to my members and to other people that other Slack groups I'm a part of, it comes off as rhetoric. Like I'm like the mad rapper, like I'm like the Kanye West.
Oh boy.
I'm like the Kanye West, like, yo, no, how, Sway? How? So so I try to I at least try to give people like, hey, if you don't keep having hackathons, and then the people coming out of hackathons only know one side of the hackathon, and that's just how to build the project, and you guys do all the work to build the project. Let them learn how to do the work as well.
Yeah.
Like here, open up Sublime, open up TextMate, and sit down and type in an interpreter and understand how that works and why it works. Explaining that to people, not just kids. So we appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. This has been great. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too. As you can see, we're still on the phone.
Thank you for tuning in to the Women in Linux podcast. Women in Linux is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization created to get women involved in the field of IT using Linux as a foundation. You can connect with Women in Linux through social media at Women in Linux on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. To join weekly meetups, go to meetups.com/Women in Linux. For more information and to connect with Women in Linux, go to www.womeninlinux.com.